They wander out of their rooms without their keys and have to be let back in. Verifying their identities can be a bit of a chore. Gas station job. Prostitute. I know who it was, not acquainted, just know the person. Shat, I repeat, shat in the corner of the store. Night shift guy ignored it for the entire shift, 4 to 6 hours, and I got to clean it up when I showed up. Totally worth my $9.50 per hour. Better time. Working night shift myself, it's late, 2 to 3 a.m.-ish, so I start to clean, eventually getting to the bathrooms. At this point no one's been in the store for maybe 2 hours and not in can for 3 or more. Walk into most horrible shit smell. Flip lights on. Shit everywhere, in the sink, in the urinal, on the toilet seat, smeared on walls. I wish I was making a joke/play on that Dumb and Dumber scene. I am not. Repressed memories, ho. McDonald's employee. 2:30 a.m. guy broke a syringe off in his arm after overdosing on heroin in the bathroom. Bled out. Through his arm. Blood. Blood everywhere. Please God no. I collect organs and tissues for transplant from decedents, which usually entails going into morgues in the dead of night. Once a donor was tubed and burped at me from the release of gases from their stomach. Nearly. Shit. Myself. Edit, please don't confuse us with live organ transplant. I should have been more specific. Mainly we do musculoskeletal tissues such as tendons, bones, corneas and skin. Organ transplantation should be performed by highly trained surgeons only on live donors. Around 12 years ago I was working security at a small company's headquarters in New York City. My partner for the night had called in sick, so I had to work from 12 to 6 all by my lonesome. Now normally, this wouldn't be a problem, I just had to sit in the back room, watch some cameras and occasionally head out for a sweep. Nothing to it, right? Well, as it turns out, one of the employees had stayed in the building after hours, and had managed to avoid my coworker's sweep from the previous shift. I first noticed a movement in my peripheral vision on one of the screens, and then again a few minutes later. This was odd, because I was used to quiet nights in this particular building. I was a little scared when I headed out for my sweep, but it was my job, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to begin. I had to start the sweep in one big hallway, and right as I entered, I saw a flash of movement at the end of it. At this point, I was sufficiently freaked out. I stood frozen for a minute or so, looking into the semi-darkness, unsure of what to do. The decision was taken out of my hands, however, as I heard a gunshot resound down the hallway. In what was the scariest moment of my life, I slowly walked down that hallway to investigate. I reached the end, and saw to my left that the president's office light was on. Slowly, I approached the door and creaked it open, scared shitless. What I saw will forever haunt me. The man had taken a seat in the president's chair, and shot himself in the head with a pistol, splattering blood and brains all over the floor and the wall. Apparently this guy was having problems at home, and because the president was supposedly a total asshole to him, he decided to off himself and scare the crap out of the president at the same time. In any case, I threw up a few times and called the police. I got the next 2 weeks off. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. I used to work nights for our state road authority, working on traffic signals. I only heard this story. Apparently a truck was carrying a drum of human body parts for disposal and the drum fell off the truck on one of our freeways. Road patrol guy called in and said there's arms and legs all over the place out here. My question is, what happened after the guy in the parking lot stabbed you? Obviously the knife wouldn't have gone in because you had your vest on, but what happens next? Does he try again? Do you just look at each other? How do you get out of that situation? Working as a pastry chef for a resort in the mountains, pulling a graveyard shift. Because we were in a kinda remote location, it was very dark outdoors. I was taking the trash out to the dumpster, which was a short walk away. As I got near the dumpster I heard rustling and scraping, shined my flashlight at the noise and saw 2 glowing white eyes. At this point I nearly lost it. Then as the creature turned its head I saw that it was a black bear, raiding our trash. Following the only advice I knew, I threw my arms up and made myself look as big as possible. The bear ran off, and afterwards we got better locks for our dumpster. I saw a 22-year-old girl pull down her pants and take a piss in a supermarket aisle. Oh wait, this was midday. Wrong thread. Not paranormal but shocking to me as I had never experienced it before. On the graveyard shift now, but when I was on the night shift I was taking a bus home around 12 a.m. and a black person walked up to me at the bus stop and told me he hated me because I was white. He then continued talking out his ass about how he hates America and that he should be in Africa right now. He said my ancestors were ignorant and responsible for slavery. My ancestors weren't in America till around the 1920s, but this guy was having none of it. People starting showing up for the bus and getting close to me. When the guy turned around to find something new to yell about, the people around told me I don't deserve this bullshit, and he tried to hurt me. They would help me beat his ass. They were all also black. One guy gave him a talk on how he was going down a dangerous road. It was pretty crazy being treated that way because of skin color, but kind of touching seeing so many people calling a person on their racism. Train conductor here, I work all sorts of hours. My first interesting graveyard experience was working in the rail yards of Los Angeles. For those of you who are familiar with the area, I was working on the tracks that run parallel to the LA River, just east of downtown. The tracks have a road passing over them every quarter to a half mile, and under every road is a junkie or 10, and they all come and ask for money or food or something when you walk by. Now mind you, I had a job to do, so I wasn't thinking about people being around the area, and so when the first junkie walks up to me, I nearly shit my pants and most likely let out a girlish scream. After this first encounter, it dawns on me where I am, and the rest of the night goes on without much incident. Well, there was a party going on in an adjacent abandoned warehouse, and for most of the night I would hear noises from the party and couldn't quite figure out what they were until I finally got close to the warehouse and could see the origin of these noises. My other notable experience occurred in the middle of winter in southern Wyoming. It was a cold, clear night with a nearly full moon, and I had spent most of the trip reading some Lovecraft. About halfway to our destination, we had a mechanical failure somewhere in our train, which requires me to walk the length of the train to identify and possibly fix the problem. I believe I was reading the music of Eric Zahn before I left, and this had a strong influence upon my psyche. The moon cast a hideous blue light upon the snow, and I feared that around every curve I may encounter an unknown line between worlds and stumble upon some cyclopean horror. Needless to say, I hurried back to the locomotive as soon as I was able. Probably be buried at a gas station. Had a man who was amazed we sold Bugler rolling papers and said it would sell for $500 in jail. He then purchased the papers and a White Owl cigar. They come in plastic tubes. He commented that he was a virgin to that size and then asked to use the restroom so he could stick the papers up his ass. He returned and asked me to call the cops on him since he had an open warrant, and not mention his plan to smuggle papers into jail. When the cops arrived, they ran his name and such and found no warrants or reason to take the man to jail. They left and the dude got all sad and walked off into the night. A phone used to call me on 911 every night, make horrible screaming sounds or sometimes white noise, and then disconnect. It scared the living shit out of me. The officers we sent out every time never found a thing, and I was repeatedly assured that the sounds on the line were due to a faulty phone line or the rain, but it never stopped bothering me. Long ago I worked grave at a gas station. We would use chopped paper and solvent to clean oil off the drive-up bays. One night the wind was gusting from every direction at once. Tried to clean, but the paper kept blowing in my eyes, so I quit and went to sit in the office. About 3 a.m. I get the feeling of being watched, turn to look out the wall-sized window in time to see the swirling paper forming a female-shaped whirlwind centered between two handprints on the window. It stood there for about 20 seconds or so, then seemed to turn and run with the wind into the night. I went out to see if I could see any greasy handprints outside on the glass that would explain why the paper would stick there, but the glass was clean. Not creepy, just the opposite. Summer of 1971, midnight at a tiny gas station at the outskirts of a beach resort. It was midweek, so not a single car had passed in almost half an hour. The fog was so thick the pumps seemed to be floating in a softly lit egg of gray. In the distance I heard a car approaching, then finally crunching onto our gravel. Majestically, the most magnificent car I'd ever seen crept out of the mist, a vision of brilliant copper, its top down revealing voluptuous white leather. It stopped at the pumps, the unmistakable burble of a 12-cylinder suddenly silenced. All I remember about him was his robin's egg blue sweater. Premium? He was asking. Sure. Phil? He nodded and looked out into the fog. I had never been so careful putting the nozzle into a car. It seemed somehow strange to be using the same gas as I did for rusty pickups or dirty compacts full of noisy kids. Neptune's Trident glinted. Maserati. The pump clicked off. That's $4. He looked up as if from a dream, and reached for a jacket on the seat. I could smell the new leather. Nice car. He just looked at me, considering this, then handed me a $5. Keep it. He turned the key and the elegant engine sprang to life. He slowly eased out into the fog, then smoothly accelerated away, each gear change in a different key. I strained to hear the glorious sound as it faded, until all that was left was the buzz of the overhead light. I worked at a gas station in the middle of the night. I saw a lot of crazy shit. One event that stands was this college girl, drunk as shit, came in to buy smokes. She drove herself there but could barely even stand up at the register. I kept looking from her to the EMTs in line behind her and back to her with a WTF look on my face. When the EMTs got to my register, they asked if she was drunk. I told them I couldn't believe she was still standing, and I pointed to her getting in her car. They stopped her and tried to get her to call someone to pick her up, but eventually let her drive herself home while they followed the entire way. This will probably get buried, but here it goes. I worked for one of the Kroger stores in my area as an overnight stalker. While I was out on a smoke break at around 3 a.m., this Chevy Tahoe pulls up and it's got a lady and her 2 children in it. Gonna have to say around 4 and 5 years old. She sits there for a minute, and another car pulls up. She gets in the other car, leaving her kids in the Tahoe. I didn't really think much of it. Maybe a drug deal or something, but then I noticed that the car is rocking. Apparently she was a hooker on the job, and it was bring your children to work night. I used to work in a nursing home that was built ages ago, and they still had the old part of the building at the back. One night shift, which was usually done by yourself, but this night there was 2 of us on. Thank God, we were sitting on the balcony looking over said old building, having a smoke and a chat. Suddenly the automatic doors behind us, which need a code to open, opens. If that wasn't weird enough, we hear someone call out. I go to investigate but find no one out of bed or in any pain, which is kind of common if people have a nightmare, etc. So I go back outside to my staff member and we again begin chatting, not really thinking much of it. That's when shit gets real. The whole of the automatic door fogs over, the lights in the old building in front of us all begin to flutter on and off, and the curtains are flapping like mad on the inside of them. Both of us stood up and huddled together, feeling our pants getting a bit tighter. Then we see a shadow walk through the building, as in through the windows, from the start of the building to the end, and then hear a loud bang, which I guess was the door closing. All the lights turn off and then the door began to clear up. Although yeah, this was pretty creepy. The creepiest thing that happened that night is we had 3 deaths. One of which we knew was going to happen, but the other 2 were total shocks. It's a horrible thing to say, but working with death you get pretty used to it. So yeah, put that in your no ghost pipe and smoke it. I work for a shipping company at an airport loading and unloading planes. One night we just finished loading a 767 and was tearing down the plane getting ready to send it out. After we moved the cones and pulled the chocks from the landing gear and hooked up the pushback, we were giving the go-ahead to disconnect the ground power unit, from the plane. A guy on the crew disconnects it from the plane before cutting off the circuit of electricity from the to the plane, so when he disconnected it, it armed from the plane to plug, resulting in a huge fireball that completely burned his hands and part of his face. That is the craziest event that I actually seen happen, but I have heard quite a few crazy stories of things that have taken place before I started working my 3rd shift job. This happened when I was in the army and doing guard duty over the weekends during the night. Background info: the guard room where soldiers rest during their off shift is rectangular and have 6 beds on each side with a total of 12 beds. I sleep on the last bed. It was about 2 to 3 a.m. in the night and I was in the guard room taking a nap when I woke up from the sound of the switch flipping on and off. I looked towards the first bed where the switches of the lights and fans are the closest and saw a long, lean, dark figure flipping the switches on and off. It continued for about a minute or so before the dark figure went to the first bed and started shaking it. I thought I was dreaming, but I can hear the sound of the bed shaking and everything was so real. After shaking the first bed for a while, it moves to the next bed and my eyes followed. This continued from bed to bed. I tried closing my eyes, but I could still hear the sound of the thing shaking the bed. I counted: bed 5, bed 6, bed 7. And not long later, I could hear bed 11 shaking, and after a while there was silence. I dreadfully waited for my turn and then it began. My bed was shaking and I was paralyzed by fear. I closed my eyes and prayed for it to end. It did, and I dozed off. Next morning when I asked if anyone felt it, none of them did. I worked night shift at a 711. No one is probably going to believe this, but a large homeless man marched into our store with a giant stick, took his shirt off, knocked our donuts to the ground, and then proceeded to run around the store shouting for God to protect him until a cross-dresser from the local gay club and I cornered him until police arrived. The police refused to arrest him, instead forcing him just off our property where he stood there 12 hours straight shouting to the heavens. I've seen plenty of shadows and figures moving around in the shop I work at. We've had cranes start swaying and hear things shift and bang together. The craziest was when there were only 2 of us left for the night. I was at my desk and the other person was at their toolbox about 50 feet away. I then heard something walk through the tank behind me. It was 5 footsteps and the tank started bouncing up and down. When I looked over at the other guy who was still at his toolbox and heard it too, we realized that no one was there. That's when we decided it was time to get out of there. Alright, so I used to hang sheetrock with a Mexican drywall crew, right? For a 3-week-long period of time, we found ourselves working in a state school in Mejia, Texas, hometown of Anna Nicole Smith, if you're interested. A state school, in all baseness, is an institution for mentally infirm children. The first day I arrived on the site, I totally got stared down by this one retarded kid who looked like he had the strength of a gorilla. Anyways, our job consisted of us framing and hanging a bunch of Durock walls in the dormitories that these bunch of kids slept in. BTW, Durock is concrete-infused sheetrock. The state school would rather have these kids knock themselves the fuck out when they're beating their heads on the walls than to replace the boards every week or so, but that's not important. Okay, so, this one night, my buddy _ and I are staying up there late to get this one section of partition done. Out of nowhere, we hear a long rising wail from one of the kids coming from maybe 2 or 3 dorms down. For about 15 seconds, we stood there and stared at the wall as this kid moaned. Eeriest shit I've ever heard. Even though he didn't speak English, and I know enough Spanish to get my throat cut, the look on his face said everything. He nodded towards the exit, we rolled up our cords and booked it. I don't think we ever stayed on site past 4 p.m. ever again after that. My brother and I worked the 3rd shift for UPS in one-day air. It's very common to have human organs shipped through in big coolers. However, these are very prone to break open if they fall more than a few feet. About a year ago, my brother was unloading and a cooler fell from atop a stack of boxes. When it hit the ground, almost a dozen human heads spilled out. My dad was a trucker in the 80s and told me this story. At the truck stops, people pull in at night to sleep and shower. There are prostitutes that roam the lot called lot lizards. My dad saw one that was making her rounds and made her way into the shadows in the corner and then left to another tuck again and again. My dad got curious as to what she was up to. So he radioed a guy that was parked in front of her corner. He told the guy to shine his brights on her when she went back into the shadows. Tay guy did as my dad told him, and everyone saw her shoving a hose in her vagina to wash out the old trucker jizz. The whole lot burst into blaring horns and bright lights, and the lot lizard in question ran away. I work as a tech support for the largest ISP here, and once whilst on a 12-hour night shift alone, which is usually a very nice time to catch up on movies, episodes or what have you. The calls are usually between 5 to 10 per those 12 hours, not a lot since it's a pay for the call kind of number. My first night shift, rather stressed about getting a call that I couldn't resolve. It's a Friday night, around 1 o'clock I get the 3rd call of the night, and all I can hear after my greeting is a kind of silent crying or sobbing mixed with a lot of heavy breathing. I get ready to just tell the person he should call back if he won't say anything. Then it starts snowballing. The first thing he says is that he's not ready to die, and has no other way out. He never explained what that meant exactly. He told me he had a gun and was prepared to take his own life with it. I literally froze for a second and started kind of trying to get him to talk to me more, keep him on the phone and off the gun. I grab my cell phone and call the police there, tell them the story. They ask for an address. Since I can see his phone number and am working at an ISP, I can get all those details. Give that to the police/emergency call service. Around 5 minutes after the talk with the police, I hear this clacking sound that sounded like a gun being cocked back in the movies. I've never been around guns, Earl. I start to panic and try to talk and just telling him whatever is on my mind, which worked since he hadn't let off the gun in that while, until I just hear this kind of boom, when the police broke up the door and the paramedics were able to come to his aid. I've never known what happened to that guy. This was around a year ago. I still hope he's okay. I've forgotten his name, etc. TL, DR ISP night shift, suicidal man calls in. I try to keep him on the phone whilst calling the emergency service, 911, until I hear the police come into his apartment and save him, if saving is what he wanted or needed.